This is Nitha Ramachandra from the NR Hour Sports Show. This is episode 965. We are live on iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Spotify, Anchor, on all the podcast platforms. And fans, please tune in. I got a special one for you guys today. A big guest. His name is Jay Paterno. He's a former Penn State quarterback. He also coached with Penn State, tight ends coach, quarterbacks coach. He does everything. A great coach in college. He also coached with Virginia, Connecticut, James Madison. But he's known for Penn State Nittany Lions. Obviously, the son of former coach Joe Paterno, the late Joe Paterno, the son. So I just want to say thank you, Jay, for joining the show. Truly an honor. And also he has a book out there called Hot Seat. So go check out his book, which we'll get to during the show. But first of all, how are you and your family doing? And thank you again for joining the show.
Oh, great to be here. You're doing great. Dug out some snow here the last couple of days, but wasn't too bad.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so I want to start off with your childhood growing up. Obviously, you're the son of the late Joe Paterno, which we'll get to later on. But you grew up in Pennsylvania, and you pretty much stayed close to home throughout your career. So, what was it like growing up in Pennsylvania? And when did you get interested in the game of football? Obviously, your father, but what made you get into the football?
Well, growing up here was great because, when you grow up in a college town and, it was back in the 70s and 80s, life was a lot simpler back then. So, I mean, you rode your bike everywhere. You were on campus, you were around young people, always around a really vibrant community with, the great thing about living in state college is 40-something thousand, 50,000 people in town are always going to be 18 to 22. And then once they age out, we kick them out and get younger people. So it's a fun place. It was a fun place to grow up. But, from the earliest, when I was little, I would, go into my dad's den and, he'd be working in his den early in the morning. And, I just got the football bug and never really lost it.
Yeah. So for you, who outside of your father, who did you look up to in the NFL or college NFL? Who was that one coach outside of your father that you looked up to the most?
Well, when I was a kid, it was Coach Bryant in Alabama, because he and my dad were really kind of the Nick Sabans of their day. I mean, they were the people that kind of were the national presence in terms of coaching. I've read a lot of books on him. Bill Walsh is somebody I've always admired. There's a whole number of guys. And then, some of the guys I coached with over the years picked up things from all of them, but certainly my dad was probably the biggest influence on my coaching career and style, certainly.
Yeah, so tell our fans about your playing career back in the day. Obviously, you're a quarterback at Penn State, but in high school, did you get to learn any other positions before choosing before settling on quarterback?
No, I mean, I was from the time, even really, if you go back to playing pickup football in the neighborhood, I always wanted to be the quarterback, and I was fairly bossy, so I got my way. But so I played it. But when I got to Penn State, I was not starting quarterback and knew I wouldn't be. Competed like I was going to be, but I knew reality. The guys more talented than I am. But when you're on the scout team, you do other things. Mm-hmm. So there are times the scout team. There's always like 2 or 3 scout team quarterbacks. And then you have wideouts get hurt. So it's go out and run this route, go out and do that, and go out and do that. So you did a lot of different things in the scout team, which exposed you to a lot of things. And then, so that was fun doing that until, you came across the middle to catch a ball and a guy laid you out. Yeah, that was not so much fun. And I have great respect for wide receivers who are willing to do that now.
Yeah. So for you, what was it like staying close to home? Obviously, playing career, coaching career. But what was it like committing? How many offers did you get from high school? And was it an easy choice for you just to come and choose Penn State and come home?
Well, I was a walk-on guy. I was not a great high school football player by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, my senior year was hurt, so didn't play as much. Really didn't played maybe half the time, whatever it was. So I didn't have a lot of things coming at me. But I walked on to Penn State, and that was, I considered walking on some other places and had some opportunities to do that. But, once I looked at it, I figured out where else I knew I wanted to coach. And I figured, where else am I going to learn the game better than right here with the guys on that staff? Because there were some great football coaches on that staff when I was there. Jim Caldwell, who's been a head coach in the NFL, been the Super Bowl, was a quarterback coach. I mean, there's a whole number of guys that were on that staff.
Yeah. So what was it like as a player for you playing for Penn State? Obviously, they have a great fan base. They go crazy during games. And what was it like wearing the blue and white helmet jersey and all for you?
Well, it just meant the world because I had grown up with that being the
Yeah.
ideal. That's the ideal college football program in at that time, and that's how I looked at it. So it was just, to come out of tunnel the first time was really something really cool. And then just to be a part of it, to be a part of that tradition and get to be around the guys that made that some of the guys I played with on the team, all Americans, guys in the College Football Hall of Fame, and just to be around that was just a great learning experience, and a great experience in terms of just development. Now, that's having said that, I may have benefited from going away because one of the things happens to kids that grow up in State College, for example, they forget athletics, but they go to Penn State. Sometimes they have a hard time really because they have all these friends. They don't really branch out, and football enabled me to branch out, and that helped.
Yes, and you got to play underneath your father as a player, and obviously you learned from Jim Caldwell. And what was it like having coaches like your father and Jim? Obviously, Caldwell, well respected in the game, and great head coach. And what was it like learning from Jim Caldwell and your father at that time?
Well, the thing about it is they were no nonsense guys.
Yeah.
When you talk to guys who played at Penn State over the years, one of the things that comes across, and when you talk to NFL guys over the years during that era, there was, I will talk to guys in the NFL and they'll say, there was a label called a Penn State kid.
Mhm.
And they would, even if a kid didn't go to Penn State, they'd say, oh, this guy's like a Penn State kid because they're on time for everything. They're professional. They handle themselves a certain way. So the biggest thing that came out of that, Jim was a consummate professional. Joe was a consummate professional. I mean, when we had a team meeting, if it was at 1:00, you better be in your seat by about 12:55. You're probably the last one in there.
Right.
And those were the demands that were made on everything you did. And that's the kind of lesson that helps you not just be a football player, be a coach, but certainly in life. And you'd be amazed how many guys that played for Joe over the years still are 5 or 10 minutes early for everything. And it just became ingrained in them. And I think that was the biggest thing that we all got from those guys.
Yeah. So what would you say? Tell our fans, what would you say your most memorable game or best moments that you had as a player at Penn State?
Well, I didn't play much at all because again, like I wasn't that guy,
Yeah.
But in terms of as a member of that team, certainly my freshman year, we beat Miami for the national championship on January 2nd of '87, which still is the highest rated college football telecast in history all these years later. That was an incredible thing to be a part of. We were scout team quarterbacks, and Vinny Testaverde was a quarterback for Miami. He was mobile quarterback and tough to tackle. So the entire month we were live every day in practice, and it was a long month of getting hit and tackled. And the payoff was well worth it.
Yeah. So before we get to your coaching career, I actually we had a couple of Penn State former players. We had Andre Collins on the show last year. And speaking of Penn State history, you got tons of players come out for the NFL draft. For example, you got Andre Collins, LeVar Harrington, a great linebacker, and then you got recently Micah Parsons. I'm a big Cowboy fan, and Micah Parsons turning out to be a star already. And what do you like about the Penn State history and the time you played, and the program is growing big time now?
Well, first, I know Sunday was a rough day for you with the Cowboys.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just unfortunate that they were just. And I think Micah Parsons, they've got him in a position now where he really can do. He's playing fast, not necessarily thinking, and that's one of the things I think everybody has to remember when a guy's a rookie is get him in a position to know what he's doing and go do it. And I think he's done he's obviously made an impact that way. But the tradition of so many guys going to the NFL. You mentioned Andre Collins. He and I came in the same class together. And Andre was a great linebacker for many years in the NFL, but a great person as well. But there's such a tradition of great Penn State guys going to the NFL. I mean, you look at across the board. I mean, there are still. Yeah. I think Penn State had 15 guys on rosters of playoff teams, which I think was 4th or 5th of all in all schools in the country. So I mean, it's just something that there's something unique about Penn State guys.
I forgot about Sean Lee too. I can't forget about.
Oh yeah, yeah. John Lee, honest to God, I mean, yeah, unfortunately had some injury bugs, but
Yeah.
you know, when he was healthy and playing, it didn't. And I'm not really a fan of any one NFL team because it got to the point where I started to know guys like different teams, so I just watched the games. But I mean, if it didn't matter what, you know, if Sean Lee was on, I'd stop and watch him play because, I mean, he's one of the most instinctive football players I've ever been around.
Yeah. So now getting to your coaching career, you had an interesting coaching career. You started at Virginia, but for you, would you say being around your father and coaches like Jim Caldwell made you want to become a coach, and then you became a great coach over the years? So tell our fans about the process, how you got into coaching, and would you say learning from your father and Jim Caldwell got you become a better coach?
Yeah, well, when I first got out of college, I went to be a graduate assistant coach at the University of Virginia, and George Welsh was the coach there. And George is really, he's a college Hall of Fame coach, and really learned a lot from him. And it was good to get away because I kind of knew, until you go somewhere else, you don't know what you don't know. So I went elsewhere and was able to see things from a different angle and ask, why do you do that? Why do you do that? And the guys I was on that staff with, Tom O'Brien was the head coach at BC and NC State for a while. George Welsh mentioned, College Football Hall of Fame guy, and a bunch of really, really good football coaches on that staff that George had. So I just, one of the things I did, I just kept notes on everything and just to try and absorb everything I can. And whether it's coaching or whatever it is, I think the biggest mistake people make is they think they know everything they need to know. And the reality is, doesn't matter. I'm 50 something years old, whatever it is now. I stopped counting when I got to 21, but I know I'm over 50. I'm still learning, constantly learning and trying to pick things from people. And I think that was great. So that was a great situation. I went to University of Connecticut, went to James Madison University and learned from two other coaches, and then came back to Penn State. So that going away made me a better coach right off the bat. And, I'd call my dad and say, hey, have you guys ever done this? You ever done that? And he'd be like, no. And say, well, so we'd exchange him from ideas and never got to play against him as a coach, or coach against him as a coach, which I think would have been fun once, but it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah. So speaking of, you went to Connecticut, James Madison, but what was it like for you having the opportunity to go back home, the college you played for? Obviously your father coached, and what was it like just going back to Penn State as a coach?
Well, it was coming home. I mean, it was familiar, but also I knew the guys in the staff. Joe had a coach leave to be a head coach somewhere else. Craig Service went to be coach at the University of Buffalo. And, he was looking around and some of the guys in the staff said, why don't you just hire Jay? I mean, we know what he can do. He works all our camps in the summer. We know what he's capable of and everything. We know he's good enough to do it. So they really pushed the idea. And then when I came back, it was, the good thing is I had played there. And so the professional relationship that I would have to have with Joe was already established. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they work for a dad or a mom or whatever the case may be, a family member, is you've got to be able to put a line between the professional and the personal. And so I would call him Joe in the office. I call him Joe when I talk to him about interviews, things like that. I just wanted to make everybody understand that this is a professional relationship, not a personal. Now, when I was at home, when I'd go over for dinner or something, then it was dad this, dad that. But when anything professional, it was either coach or Joe. And that was a delineation so that everybody else was comfortable. Because the one thing you don't want to be is sitting in a coach's meeting and you're arguing about what to do on third down, whatever the case may be, and say, but Dad, I want to do this. Because then you sound like a 3-year-old, and everybody else was always playing the dad card. So, I mean, and Joe, for his part, was very much, he said, look, I'm going to be harder on you than any other coach because they're all watching. And the first week I was back, we had a 6 a.m. workout for the players. And I came out wearing sweatpants.
Wow. And
he said to me, I don't want to ever see you out here in sweatpants ever again. And I said, okay. And I looked around and there were 2 or 3 other coaches in sweatpants. And I said, well, what? He goes, you have to be at a different standard. And I wore khakis. Everybody thinks Harbaugh was the original khaki wearer. Joe wore khakis for decades. And I wore khakis forever. That's just the way it was.
Wow. Yeah. So speaking of, you got to coach in Connecticut. You got to coach the wide receivers, tight end, and your first stint with Penn State, you coached the tight ends again. So what
Yep.
was it like coaching the offensive weapons from Connecticut with wide receiver, tight end, and then Penn State's tight ends over the years?
Well, I think the thing about, especially why I had a lot of fun coaching wide receivers, and it was great because, and then when I became a quarterback coach, it
Mhm.
helped me. I think one of the biggest mistakes coaches make is they specialize right off the bat. Like when I first went to UVA, I was with the defensive side of the ball,
Yeah.
and then I was with the offensive line and then the quarterback. So I learned all those different positions, how the things all fit together. And coaching wideouts was a great thing for me because that was one of the positions I hadn't coached. And then to tight ends, great thing about coaching the tight end is very similar to quarterback in terms of how cerebral they had to be in those systems because they had to know the run blocking, they know the pass blocking, they know the pass protection, much like a quarterback. So they are, people don't realize how vital tight ends are. I think the NFL does. I think that's something that's happened the last decade and a half in the NFL is the value of the tight end. But I was fortunate to coach some really good guys.
Yeah.
Tony Stewart played 9-10 years in the NFL. John Gilmore, I think, played 10 years in the NFL. And then we recruited a bunch of other guys. So at one point, I was a tight end coaching for 4 or 5 years. But then a couple of years later, we had more tight ends in the NFL than any other school in the country at that point.
Yeah, speaking of players, you got to coach Derek Williams and Michael Robinson. You coached Michael Robinson to a Heisman Trophy. So what was it like coaching those two players? And it must have been a treat for you.
Well, Michael was a finalist. He didn't win the trophy, although I will argue he should have.
Yeah, he should have.
He should have. But, Derek, it's funny. I was watching, not to bring up the 49ers, but Deebo Samuel, what he could do. Everybody goes out in these systems now and they want running backs that can play wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What people aren't, and that gives you a lot of versatility, what you can do. Having a wide receiver who can come back and play running back adds a whole nother dimension. And I think, we were doing that with Derek Williams. I mean, he was in the backfield carrying the football as a tailback, a number of other things. Now I'm watching San Francisco do this and I'm smiling because I'm going, I've seen that movie before and it's a great movie. It's a lot of fun. And I'm a little envious of Kyle Shanahan because he's got those pieces.
Yeah.
And Derek, the fortunate thing we had with Derek that in that 05 team and then the 08 team, in our skill set, we had Derek Williams, we had Jordan Norwood, Deion Butler, we had Evan Royce. We had a bunch of guys that you could take and move all over the place, and they were smart enough so that halftime you could say, "Hey, Deion, I'm going to put you in the slot for this series to see how they match up." Mm-hmm. And he knew what was supposed to happen. And Derek was the same way. I mean, you could go in there and one of the tricks we did, they all came in. A bunch of those guys came in as freshmen. And so one of the tricks we did, they all came in January to get them to learn the playbook. Mm-hmm. We put, back then you had memory cards for Madden on your PlayStation. Yeah. And we put our playbook on a memory card and told them they had to play Madden with our playbook.
Oh, wow.
And so with our with our nomenclature and everything, so they were literally sitting at home learning our offensive terminology.
Wow.
Playing Madden. And there were all different kinds. We were way ahead of the game on some things like that.
Wow, that's great. That's an interesting way about learning plays. Yeah, but speaking of,
I mean, they're going to play. They're going to spend hours on that. So we may as well get something out of it.
Yeah.
And then I would even bring them in. We had one set up in the quarterback room, and I'd put in certain defenses for teams we're playing that week and kind of simulate some of that stuff. Just in the off season, say, oh, you're here. These are Ohio State blitzes. These are whatever. So we did some of that. You're talking 2005, 2006. Nobody was doing that at the time.
Yeah. Speaking of, I don't want to bring up the 49ers either after what happened to my Cowboys, but I have to bring up Deebo Samuel because this guy is a stud. And Kyle Shanahan is using him the right way. But speaking of Kyle Shanahan, he's by far one of the best offensive genius out there ever. So for you, so whenever teams like have that type, the player where they can do multiple things, does that make your job easier for coaches where you can come up with multiple plays, and especially against they're playing Green Bay this week. So do you think Kyle Shanahan has the advantage here when it comes to scheming and maybe coming up with other plays for Deebo Samuel?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. I think what everybody, what the game has really evolved into a personnel matchup game. And you can take all the analytics you want, and you can do all these things with, oh, you should go for, but at the end of the day, if my O is better than your X, and I can make sure that I get that guy on the right guy, then I should win that matchup and win the game. And what I think what's happening is defenses are so tied into what personnel's in there. So if they've got Deebo Samuel in there and one back, they go, okay, we're going to put the nickel in, because they've got 3 wide receivers and one back.
Right.
Next thing you know, you can put the running back as a lead back and Deebo as the tailback, and now all of a sudden you're in a two running back set. And now that you've got the nickel in there, and they can overpower and pound you. So I mean, I think there's no question those are the kind of things that the guys like Kyle Shanahan, and that's the way I loved the coach when I was coordinating, was how do we get this guy on him? How do we get this guy here? If they're, what are they going to do with their corners? Are they going to keep them on the wideouts? It's all the chess pieces, and I think Kyle's done a marvelous job with that.
Yeah. So going back to your coaching career in 2011, you're mentioned as one of the best quarterback coaches in the Big Ten. So what was that like for you, being mentioned and being recognized as that? And you had some great quarterback talent in that year.
Yeah, I think the reality is this: is that those things are nice, and it's good that people are paying attention to what you're doing. But at the end of the day, the minute somebody says you're the best at something, everyone's going to take a shot at you. So it's just one of those things that it was nice for somebody to recognize it, but also at the end of the day, the next day you had to go out and get somebody ready and go to practice, and the next team that you were playing didn't care what you were. They were ready. They were studying you and trying to beat you.
Yeah, I want to ask you about 2 quarterbacks that I remember from Penn State: Trace McSorley and also Matt McGloin. And Matt McGloin, I'm surprised it didn't work out for him. He was a great quarterback coming out of Penn State, and even Trace McSorley, he's still in the league, I think, as a backup somewhere. Yep. But can you speak on those 2 quarterbacks, and what happened to Matt McGloin when he went to the
NFL? Matt was a walk-on out of Scranton, and somebody brought me his tape. Dick Anderson was our offensive line coach who recruited that area. And he said, what do you think? I said, I think this kid can play for us. And he said, well, I said, no, I think legitimately he can be on the field for us someday, if down the road. And it turned out to be that way. And then Matt, I think he was 4 years in the NFL, whatever it may be. But I thought, I think he did really, really well. And you never know what the NFL wants. And sometimes there's, there's a lot of guys in that league right now you look at and go, why is he in the league? And then there's other guys who go, why isn't he in the league?
Yeah.
And then McSorley was after my time at Penn State, but I really enjoyed watching him play the game. He's the kind of quarterback that you'd love to coach. He's got passion for the game. He's tough. And he's not the biggest guy, doesn't have the strongest arm, doesn't have some of the things that maybe you look for on a test, when you test, height, weight, all that kind of stuff 40 times. But you know what? He's got a competitor. And Matt McGloin was the same way, just intense competitors. And that's why they got as far as they did. And because of that, a lot of guys more talented didn't get as far as those guys did because of that.
Yeah. So in 2012, your Penn State coaching came to an end with the hiring of Bill O'Brien. And how tough was that for you when you heard that news? And I mean, did you ever think they could have kept you longer as a coach?
No, I mean, I was realistic in that, in terms of with all the things that kind of happened here in 2011 and the PR around it. I was realistic. And I think that was, but it was tough. But at the same time, all that was going on, and my dad ended up dying of cancer, and a lot of other things went on. So I'm not sure I could have been, quite frankly, I'm not sure I could have committed the time that I would have needed to stay on and coach. And then, I've tried to get back into that coaching here and there, and that still comes up in terms of, well, all that stuff. I mean, so that's reality. That's the hand you're dealt, and you deal with it.
Yeah, speaking of Penn State legend, I want to bring this up to you. We also had Brandon Short on the show a couple years ago, and this guy is doing big things right now in the community, and obviously a great player. So, can you speak on Brandon Short and tell our obviously the fans already know about him, but tell him the first time that you met him and what he's doing now for the community.
Well, the first time I met him, I think it was my first year back at Penn State. He was a redshirt freshman linebacker.
Yeah.
And he was one of those guys that, offensive coaches always had to tell him to tamp it down because he was very intense, very physical. Got thrown out of practice here and there because, he'd take on the starting running back on Wednesday of a game week and nail him. And you're like, boy, this guy is going to be unbelievable by the time he's done. And you're always happier to have to dial a guy back than rev him up. Mm-hmm. And he was a guy you always had to dial back. And he's been on the board of trustees now.
Yeah.
I forget what year he got on, but I've been on since 2017, maybe 2018, 2019. And it's been very, very active in a lot of different fronts, and a very strong advocate for some things in diversity, equity, inclusion at Penn State, which we all are. In fact, in November of 2017, I made a speech at the board, basically saying at that time, there was not a single Black member of a 36 member board. And after I was done, he and I had a conversation. I said, you got to run now.
Yeah.
And so he did. But I mean, so that's an issue that I've always been passionate about in terms of diversity and equity, inclusion and tolerance, all those things, because of the house I grew up in. Mm-hmm. My dad in 1983, after winning the national championship, addressed the board of trustees and challenged them to make Penn State more diverse in 1983. At a time when that wasn't on the forefront of people's minds. So, and my mom, very similar. And so that's where I came from. And Brandon has been a great partner in terms of those things and trying to advance those issues, which are very important in this day and age.
Yeah. So speaking obviously since your father's death and dismissal, you written a lot of guest columns. You spoke to young voters too at Penn State. So what's it been like for you? Obviously, after your Penn State career and since your father's death, and what's it like been for you to speak to young athletes or young people, young kids or young students that go to Penn State still?
Well, I love it. I guest lecture probably 2 or 3 times a semester in various classes, and my interests have always run way beyond football. In 2008, I was a surrogate speaker for the Obama campaign and went around the state of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. in the primary season, not in the fall. Obviously, it was a little tied up then. Mm-hmm. But so that was kind of gave me a taste of being able to reach beyond just football, and that really, really meant a lot to me. And done some things politically since then, but also just being around this university, being able to be involved with young people, and still feel like, even though I'm not coaching, being able to reach people and help them understand what else is out there. I really relish those opportunities, and especially some of the things I've been involved in terms of registering voters and students to vote and get them involved in the political process, because the decisions that are made impact these students' lives, whether they know it or not. Mm-hmm. And so that's been really fulfilling.
So what was it like helping out former President Barack Obama and helping him out in the campaign? And I'm just curious, did he ever consider you maybe bringing you on the staff if you got elected?
No, I was coaching. I made it very clear that I was not interested in any kind of, low-level DC job and that kind of thing. But, I got to spend some time with him. And then, so that was really kind of cool. And then when he came to Penn State in it was really February of 2011. Mm-hmm. So the White House calls and says, hey, President Obama would like you to be there and that kind of stuff and whatever. And so my mom calls me and she said, hey, we'd like to go. So I call him back. I go, hey, can I bring my parents? Yeah. They're like, no problem. And then they hang up, and then it clicks. About 20 minutes later, they call me back and said, you mean your parents? I said, yeah, my parents. He goes, you mean like Joe and Sue? I said, yeah. He goes, yeah. Okay. The president would like to meet them. I said, yeah. I said, they're the only parents I have. Right. And so they called me and said, we need your parents' social security numbers. And so I called my dad or my mom. I go, she goes, I'll get your dad's. I go, Mom. I said, so I called back. I said, I think my dad's social security. My dad was born before social security. I said, so I jokingly said 000-00-0020. And they're like, I said, no, I'm kidding. But it was kind of neat for that. And it was neat to introduce my dad to because my dad had tremendous respect for him, and tremendous respect for what he meant to so many people in this country as president of the United States. He said, look, I don't agree with him on everything he wants, but, I think it's good for the country. And I think what he will mean to young people all over this country as a role model of where you can go. But it was fun to have the president of the United States want to meet my parents rather than my parents, Joe, saying, this is my son. He knew me before he knew my dad. That was kind of cool to turn the tables on my dad.
That's great. That's awesome. And Barack Obama, what a great guy, obviously great president. And for you just to be around him and learning his personality, he has an amazing family, great daughters, a great wife. And he's all about family. And also he relates to sports, big sports fanatic, plays basketball, man. This guy can shoot up the buckets. But for you, what was it like just being around him? Not only the campaign, but just outside of the campaign, just hanging out with him afterwards too.
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time hanging out with him after the campaign. So, but there were 2 or 3 times that I was around him, and that was a lot of fun. I think the thing about it is, one of the things I learned in that campaign was it was probably will go down as one of the best run campaigns anybody's ever had from a logistical and organizational standpoint. And there were things I learned just being around it as a surrogate speaker that I then translated into recruiting and things. So I was a recruiting coordinator for a number of years and said, hey, here's how they're organizing this. Here's how they're organizing that. This is how they're getting into communities. This is how they're reaching people. This is how they're messaging. So all those things I picked off as things that I could translate to football. And so that was kind of neat that way. And it was neat to see how many of our players got involved. Wow. And I, one of the things you got to be very careful when you're coaching is you can't bring the politics in the locker room. No. So players would come to me and say, look, you got to contact the downtown office. I can't be involved in this, but here, and so many of our guys got involved in registering voters and doing certain things. Obama did a rally in March, I think, of 2008 before the Pennsylvania primary. And one of our players introduced him, and then another player sang the national anthem, a guy named Gerald Cadogan. So, there were a lot of guys involved, and I think they all, over the years have really relished that they were involved in that, and devoid of me being involved with it at all.
Yeah, that's why, man, because Penn State, that's why Penn State has a great tradition. People help out there all the time. And also speaking of coaching, and tell our fans, what would you say your best moment or best thing for your kids or the players you coach? What would you say your best moment was as a coach throughout your career?
Oh, geez, there's a number of them. But, I think one of the seasons that will always stand out will be the 2005 season, because we had 2 really bad years, the previous 2 years. And, nobody thought Michael Robbins could be the quarterback that would get us a Big Ten championship. Everybody had written Joe off. They'd written me off. They'd written so many people off in that program. And we knew what we had. It's one of those things where it's like, we know there's going to be a pony under the Christmas tree at the end of the day. Yeah. We just can't tell anybody there's going to be a pony there. And we're 90% sure we can get the pony, but we're not sure. But we don't want, so you don't want to go out and write a check, with your mouth that you can't cash with your performance. And I think one of the things that happens to coaches now is so many of them are always in the sell mode, and they're overselling. And then when the team comes out and loses 3 or 4 or 5 games, whatever the case may be, they're surprised that the fan base turns on. Yeah. So we just kept our mouth shut. But that 2005 season was so rewarding, and it was really kind of told you guys. And then 3 years later, we came out of the 2000, next year, we win the Big Ten in 2005. We win 9 games in 2006. We win 9 games in 2007. Again, people are starting to say, well, they're not elite. They're not this, they're not that. And before the bowl game in San Antonio at the end of the 2007 season, we knew we were going to go back to some spread offense concepts. And at that point, Rich Rodriguez has gotten hired at Michigan. It was, he's going to bring the spread to the Big Ten. And we've been running spread offense concepts for a number of years, as had a bunch of other people. So it was becoming this recruiting story. So I said, look, we're going to create the spread HD. And the HD was just high diversity, because a lot of spread offenses are very simple. So we took it to a different level. We could go from two backs. We had people, most teams have 3 or 4 personnel groups they use in the course of a game. Over the course of that season, we were around 14, 15 different personnel groups. So we were throwing all kinds of stuff at people, but we leaked out. I let a couple of players mention at the end of the bowl game and the post-game press conference, well, we're not going to have a spread off. It's going to be spread HD. So it became this, what the hell is the spread HD? Nobody ever heard of it. So it became this off-season mystery. Wow. And Joe said to me, now look, you can leak this, but there better be a payoff. I mean, you're betting the house on this. And we ended up finishing in the top 10 all time in the Big Ten in 3 or 4 different offensive categories. Had a great offensive football team. Wow. And mostly it was because we had really, really smart players that we could move all over the place. It's with a guy like Kyle Shannon, or whether it was a spread HD offense, whatever, it's not what the coach knows, it's what the players know. And that's the limit that you always have is, what can they handle mentally and still play fast? And we had guys that were really smart and were able to do all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Most people think coaching is easy, but in college, there's another step to it, which is recruiting. So sometimes it could be tough for coaches when it comes to recruiting. So for you, in your case, how tough is it for you when it came to recruiting players to come to your program? And was it tough sometimes?
Well, yeah, because recruiting is all done geographically.
Yeah, and
it was then. So everybody different areas. So I had Ohio. So at that time, you're dealing with Ohio State, and so you're going there, and you're always the away team. So you got to go in and really bust your chops. Whereas guys recruiting Pittsburgh or Philly or Harrisburg or whatever, they're the home team, so they're the favorite in the clubhouse. So it was tough that way. But it was not tough to recruit for Penn State simply because we had a brand that was very obvious. You're going to come to Penn State. You're going to go to class. You're going to have to do things a different way.
Yeah.
We didn't want to be like, we never said, well, everybody else is doing this. We have to be like everybody else. We got to do this because this is what everybody else is doing. So we always went in there with a understanding that, hey, if you don't want to go to class, don't come here. If you don't want to be part of a team and be team first, don't come here. If this is all about you, don't come here. And so that part of it was, you lost kids because of that. And there were kids that you didn't recruit because you looked at their grades and said, they're not going to make it at Penn State. They'll be gone in 2 years. And what good is that? It's not fair to us, not fair to him. And mostly not fair to that student to put him in a situation they can't handle. I think that's, I think one of the things that's happened with the recruiting rankings and all those things is people are, they don't care about, they get so caught up in the recruiting rankings, whereas, it's great. You can go out and get the, if you look at our 05 through 08, that group that we recruited in 05, I think the recruiting ranking was 24th or 25th in the country in that recruiting class. Mm-hmm. Yet we won 2 Big 10 titles with those guys.
Right.
You look at Penn State in 2018, for example, had a top 10 recruiting class. I think they were 7th or whatever it was. Well, most of those guys, a lot of them transferred, a lot of them weren't part of the program the last couple of years, in years 3 and 4. And you see that's why Penn State's kind of gone backwards a little bit. So those older guys, part of that's transfer portal and all this other stuff. But I mean, that's the recruiting rankings, they're not even worth the paper they're printed on. And you got to recruit people that want to be part of what you stand for and what you believe in.
Wow. Yeah. So I got a couple of friends that went to Penn State, or big Penn State fans, or went to Penn State. They said, they just said, thank you and your family for what you did for Penn State throughout the years.
Well, I appreciate that. And, it's mostly my mom and my dad, and my mom now is still more involved as she ever was at Penn State. And it's a labor of love, and Penn State's a place that, it has a way of kind of bringing the best out of people.
Yeah. So, I want to get to this. This is really interesting. In October 2013, you were considering running for the Pennsylvania 5th Congress District. Take us through that process. Tell our fans about that process. And did you put yourself in there? Your name?
Well, I was contacted by the Democratic Congressional DCCC, whatever it is, DCCC. I should know what it means, but old age. But anyway, so they contacted me, did some polling in the field and all that kind of stuff. And I said, look, I'll consider it. And at the end of the day, it was just not the time. And, I decided to run for lieutenant governor, and then there was a ballot challenge in terms of signatures on petitions and stuff. And the rules in Pennsylvania are very arcane. And I just, Stick to what you know. But I mean, but there's still a part of me that feels like I have a former player of mine who's very involved in this community who has been contacted about getting involved in certain things politically. And I said to him, I said, well, where do you think you can do the most good with the foundation that you have and being involved in the community the way you are now, or would you rather run for office? Where do you think? He said, I think I can do more here. I think that's what it's kind of come down to. Where do you think you can do the most good for people?
Well, yeah. So this is a two-part question. I'm going to make this $1 million question. So everybody wants to know, do you miss coaching? And is there a chance that Jay Paterno puts his name back into the coaching ring, either in NFL or college?
Yeah, I miss it. Anybody that was in it for the right reason and doesn't miss it when they're gone probably wasn't in it for the right reason in the first place. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely miss it. In terms of getting back involved, if it happens, it happens. I still talk to guys occasionally here and there, and if someone calls me up and says, hey, we'd like you to come back to coaching, then yeah, I'll do it. But with the family and everything, there's a lot of other factors involved. But my kids are older now, so it's probably three of them are already in college, and one's 2 years away, and so I'm in a different place in my life. I've stayed involved in the game. I do a TV show every week called Nittany Game Week, where we literally break down the opponent's offense and defense and special teams. So I'm constantly looking at film and all that kind of stuff. So I'm still close enough to it that I could get back into it. Now, that said, the things that with recruiting and transfer portal and all that kind of stuff, I think college football right now is at a very, very critical juncture as to what the future of the game looks like. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of national leadership right now guiding. It's just kind of adrift. And I think it would be fun to get back into coaching and have an impact on how that goes.
Well, we would love to have you in Dallas at some point. So
I don't know if Dallas would want me, but yeah. I grew up a Cowboy fan, but when they fired Tom Landry, I gave up my Cowboy fandom. And then once I got into coaching, you start to, coach guys at this team, coach guys at that team. So you just really root for the guys you know. And I'm still that way in the playoffs. If there's Penn Staters on the team, I will root for that team. If there's Penn Staters on both teams, I just watch and go, okay, well, if there's three on one team and one on the other, I go, okay, well, let's go with the three. That's kind of how I decide on my viewing. Like the Cowboys 49ers, Robbie Gould is kicking for the 49ers. And he's like in his 82nd year of coaching, of kicking, I mean. And then you got Micah Parsons on the other side. So you always look for the guys that and the guys that are Penn State guys.
Yeah. So speak of, does your kids play football too or no?
No, all my kids play lacrosse.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So a couple of them played football a little bit here and there, but they all want to play something different, which is fine. It's a great game. I wish it had been as big when I was their age as it is now, because it really is. Now that I understand the rules for the most part, it's really a fascinating game.
Yeah. So for you, what's it like now after your coaching career to have a show where you can break down the game from a different aspect, not from the sidelines? So what's that like? What's that been like for you, dissecting the game, having your own show, and also your book, Hot Seat, which is amazing. So what's it been like for you to have a book and a show now?
Well, the show's been fun because you get to break down the films. You look at who's, whether it's Michigan coming up or whether it's Michigan State, and then you talk about some of the key things that you look for. And the good thing is, if you're wrong, you don't lose your job over it. But it is funny because during the course of the game, the guys in the show was like, "Oh yeah, we were right on this. We're right on it." So we're looking at all the things that we did to see if we were right. And then the book itself, the Hot Seat, was it was a lot of fun to write, because over the years you see a lot of things in recruiting, in coaching. Guys at other schools, and you swap stories, and that's part of the whole camaraderie of it. And I used to sit around, and friends of mine would say, "What about this guy? When you guys recruiting this, what happened?" And I tell me, like, "Man, you got to write a book about this." So when COVID hit, I had sketched out a book about, kind of that part of it, of coaching, because I had written the book a couple of years earlier about my dad. But I started to sit down and think about writing this book, and I said, it's got to be a work of fiction, because I can't use people's real names because someone's going to blow my car up. because there's some things in there that are absolutely, 95% of the stories that are in that book are absolutely true. The other 5% are things that definitely could and probably did happen that I'm just not aware of. But I mean, the book is based on a lot of true stories and changing names and schools and places. And I wrote it that because I thought, I think the feedback I've gotten, people are like, oh my God, I had no idea the kind of year round it was, or the pressures you guys are under, or some of the things go on in recruiting and the payoffs and all that kind of stuff. And, it's a very realistic book and look at it. I mean, there's phone calls to the head coach at 1:30 in the morning. And, people realize, when you get a call on a Wednesday night or Thursday night at 1:30 in the morning, it's not your academic advisor letting you know that 25 of your guys made Dean's List. Congratulations. It's probably somebody somewhere they're not supposed to be doing something they're not supposed to do. So, I mean, those are all in the book. And it also a lot on the strain that the coaching lifestyle puts on his spouse as well.
That's amazing. That's crazy. And where can our fans find your book? And also, how often do you do your shows, and where can they find the show also?
Well, we did 20 weeks of the show that starts in August and goes through January. But the shows are still up on NittanyGameWeek.com. It's all one word, NittanyGameWeek.com. And there's a lot of interviews on there that we have. They're all on there. You got Gus Johnson, you got Chris Fowler, you got all kinds of people like that. Paul Feinbaum from the SEC Network's on there. And he was a lot of fun. So there's a lot of great interviews. Plus, a lot of former Penn State players are on there. And so that show ran. We were on 9 stations in 3 states, reaching into parts of 8 states, and the homes of 16 million people. Wow. And it was all Fox and ABC affiliates. It's syndicated. But all those shows are still on that website. So you can see them now. And then that show will come back in August. Mm-hmm. And we're going to do interviews throughout the course of the year that we'll put up maybe 1 or 2 a month that people will find interesting, hopefully. And then in terms of the book, both the Paterno Legacy book, which is about my dad, and the Hot Seat book are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you name it, they probably got it. And then on my website, which is jvpaterno.com, people can get signed copies sent to them and order them there as well. So a lot of different places, got a lot of different things going on.
No, we actually, speaking of Chris Fowler, we also had Chris Fowler on the show 2 years ago. He's
great,
awesome.
Great guy. Fantastic guy.
It was an honor talking to him. One of the best when it comes to college football. And Paul Feinbaum is a GOAT of college football.
Well, I've been on his show a bunch of times, and he came on ours, and his show is so unique. Yeah, and it's a lot of fun, and he's so opinionated. It's great to get back and kind of go back and forth with him, especially the SEC Big Ten stuff. But a lot of really, really good interviews on there.
Yeah. So speaking of shows for you, what's it been like sharing your stories, your experiences from Penn State and different platforms like this? I found your interview I saw your interview with Stephen Graff. He's a great podcast too out there. So what's it been like for you sharing your stories on these platforms?
Well, it's fun. I think we're in a different world now where the barrier to entry to be involved on whether it's talk radio or sports podcasting has given a lot more people a lot more forums. Yeah. Because the barrier to entry is lower than it used to be. And I think it's created a situation where you have more avenues to get stories out and talk about things. And I think that's fun. And it's always fun to take a lot of times, sometimes in interviews like this, it'll spark something I hadn't thought about for a while. Yeah. And that puts a smile on your face.
It seems like a lot of on this platform we have right now, a lot of all the people we had on the show, including you, you guys share more than you shared even before. I feel like you guys share more information that you haven't told anyone before.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Is it's part of the back and forth, and there's a comfort level on a podcast that you don't necessarily have when you're doing a taped interview on a network where they're going to slice and dice it. Yeah, and you got to be careful that you're very compact with how you answer things, and you also realize they're not going to give you a whole lot of time to tell an involved story, whereas the storytelling that's involved in podcasts is much better.
Yeah. So before we get to the last two things, can you speak on your father's legacy and on the field, off the field as a coach, and what he meant to Penn State as one?
Yeah, let me take off the hat of a son right now and be an alum, former player, and a member of the board of trustees, and talk about it in that regard. So, because I don't want to sound immodest.
Oh no, yeah.
But I think the thing that Joe had on this impact on this university was so beyond football. This was a guy that believed that Penn State should be great in everything they did. He and my mother would have donors over the house after games, not for football, but for the library, for the College of Liberal Arts, for whatever it was. If there was a big gift out there, Don Belisario gave $30 million to College Communications. There's a whole number of people like that. And, it wasn't going to benefit Joe. It wasn't going to benefit my mom. But my dad knew and my mom knew that benefiting Penn State was going to benefit everybody over the course of years. So they would have these people over. And after my dad had died, my mom was, she's a great note taker in terms of keeps files. And so that anytime somebody would come back, she'd go, oh yeah, what was the thing he liked? And she would make sure that this guy would have the bottle of booze that he liked. He'd make sure this guy would have a certain type of scotch or whatever it may be. So they were really good. So they went and looked back at the amount of money that was donated by the people that came through that house, not because of it, but the people that came through that house. It was over $1 billion, billion with a B, $1 billion in donations to Penn State by people who came through that house over the years. Now, you're talking a long time, but still, $1 billion is $1 billion. And like I said, most of it was to benefit students. They endowed scholarships for students in a whole different range of majors and things like that. So, I think their impact, his impact on Penn State was much bigger than football. Now, on the field, certainly, Penn State became a national power. It had been off and on before he got there, but, kind of established it as more of a national power than maybe it had been. And going to the Big Ten certainly helped with that. And I think the other legacy is the amount of people that went up. I think he would tell you his biggest, proudest legacy would be the impact he had on so many people's lives that came to Penn State from various different backgrounds because their association with the football program became more educated, went out and did different things. And, the number of guys that are out there doing things. I mean, I see stories in Aaron Maben going into inner city schools in Baltimore and getting coats and forcing them to turn the heat on and getting money. I mean, those are all examples of what this place has always been about.
Yeah, we had Aaron Maben on the show too.
One of the really interesting and phenomenal human beings that ever came through the program.
And he paints now, by the way. He's a great painter.
Yeah, incredibly talented.
Yeah. So speaking of, what do you like about today's Penn State football? Obviously, James Franklin, who just signed a big extension, he's going to be there for a while. So what do you like about him, the coaching, him and the coaching staff and the players they're bringing in now for Penn State?
Well, I think there's an energy that they have that is, it's a lot of people relate to it. They had a really good run between 2016 and 2019. The last couple of years, they've been a little, it's been a little challenging. And I think that there's a little bit of the next couple of years will really tell the tale as the overall strength of the program. We've had, 93 to 96 had a great run. 2005, 2008 had great runs. And a lot of really, really good years, but there are eras, and those runs all came out of seasons that were less than what we expected. Mm-hmm. And certainly this year is getting as high as number 4 in the country, going to Iowa and losing and end up 7-6. People, that's not what people expected coming into the season. So there's a little bit of they're at a point where now it's kind of okay, show me what you got kind of mentality. And I think this is one of those things where you kind of find out what kind of program you have, what kind of people you have. And you go out and you prove people wrong and you shut them up. I mean, I know in 2005 there were, we were picked 8th, 9th in the Big Ten and people had written us off. And, Mike Robinson went out to the Big Ten media days and somebody asked a joke, said, you and Illinois are the 2 worst teams in the league and you're playing this year. What's that going to be like? And Mike just looked at him and said, we're going to win the damn Big Ten. Next question. And everybody thought he was nuts. Yeah. And we won the Big Ten. And he came back really motivated. And I hope that this group finds that same kind of motivation. And I think that I have all the faith that they will. I think, the quarterback coming back, Sean Clifford, that, he's got another year to even improve even more and hopefully lead the team to the kind of season that they want to have.
Yeah, we have a question here for you real quick. Somebody wants to know what's your thoughts on the Georgia winning the national championship against Alabama and Kirby Smart finally getting his first title.
I think it was good for the game that they won. I think it was good, and just to take it back a step further, I think it was good for the Big Ten that Michigan won. Not that I ever root for Michigan, but I think, to break that Ohio State hold on the conference, I think was important. To see Pitt win the ACC and break the Clemson hold, and to see Georgia win the national championship, kind of break that Alabama hold. I think it's all important for the game. I think it's really, and I think that everybody seems to think the answer is we got to expand the playoffs so more teams have access. The reality is you've got to chase the standard, and Alabama has been the standard, and Georgia made it very, very clear that, and I think one of the things that people really underestimate about a coach like Kirby Smart and a coach like Nick Saban, they look at the recruiting ranking and say, well, that's why they're there.
Yeah.
The reality is they're recruiting really good players. But if you watch those teams, they are so good fundamentally, and technique and discipline, and knowing where they're supposed to be, knowing if I'm blitzing the A gap, I'm going to be in the A gap. I can't freelance it. I think they do a great job. I was over at Ohio State a number of years ago for spring practice when Urban was still there. And one of the things that really impressed me, and they were in a great run at that point, how much attention to detail was put into everything they did. And then that's what separates you. I mean, you can go recruit a team that's going to get you 9-10 wins. Mm-hmm. But how do you get from 10 wins to playoff? And I think that's what, I think if you look at Michigan this year, I think Harbaugh went at it with that mentality, and they were a really sound fundamental football team. And I think that's why they beat Ohio State this year. I think, they basically made up their mind. And it was, as hard as it is for me to say this, it was, to watch that team's chemistry and go and play Ohio State and beat them. You kind of felt good for them. I mean, as much as anybody from Penn State can ever feel good about Michigan, it was nice to see guys like Aiden Hutchinson and that have that kind of success. And now I hope that Penn State's turn next year.
Do you like this?
And every year after that.
Yeah, back to back.
Yeah, I'm not greedy.
Do you like the cigar trend now that Joe Burrow started?
You know what? He is fun to watch. He really is. It's some guys just have it. They got the mojo, and he has it. I mean, there's no question he has it. And you just hope he stays healthy and that he has a long career. I mean, as a guy that's married to a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I'm not particularly happy because when the Steelers lose, she's not happy.
Yeah.
But I look at him, I go, boy, if he stays healthy, they are set at quarterback for a long time.
Yeah. So the last few things here before I let you go, and our team is part of this foundation. It's called the Hugh Jackson Foundation. I'm sure you know him. He's a former NFL coach. He's now the head coach for Grambling State. So we're trying to help him prevent human trafficking, making sure the community stays safe, the kids stay safe, and it's so horrible out there what we're seeing with human trafficking, and we're trying to come up with a way how to stop it. And we're going to send you the foundation and to you and your wife so you can go check it out.
Sounds great. And it's one of those issues that people do not know enough about. If I sat here and told you I know everything I need to know about it, I would be being less than honest with you.
Yeah.
But I do know that in all my reading and political involvement, that this is an issue that's on the fringe in terms of public consciousness, but it is a very, very real issue. And I'm glad that you guys are involved in that and that you're taking an active interest in it, because, at the end of the day, change comes from the bottom up, not from the top down.
Yeah, thank you. And the last thing here, would you like to say anything to all the nurses, doctors, and all the essential workers right now?
Absolutely. It's unfortunate this has become politicized. It's unfortunate that, there are so many Americans that won't take just basic make minor sacrifices in their life to make this, to help this thing all go away. You can argue all you want about whether masks, you're not being asked to do that much. Just freaking do it, because there are people who are in emergency rooms or in hospitals who are being overworked. They're facing this every day. They're seeing death every day. And, hats off to them, but also, the rest of us need to make sure we get our act together and we don't make this us versus them and divide. It's a small inconvenience. And, in my lifetime, and I'm fairly advanced in age, older than you are, my mom grew up during World War II, and people in that country had ration stamps. You only get gas on certain days, and there were all these sacrifices that everybody to make. In my lifetime, this is the first time that the entire country has been asked to. We have to all be in on this thing.
Yeah.
And we owe it to the people that are essentially in the trenches every day dealing with this pandemic. And you know what? Hats off to them. Thanks to them. And I hope to God that the rest of us do everything we can to get this done sooner than later. And I know people are tired. It's been 2 years, but you know, World War II was 4 years. And certainly, you know, if we're the kind of country we think we are, then we should be more than willing to do whatever it's going to take.
Well said over there. And before I end the show, would you like to plug your show again and your 2 books you have so people know where they can find it?
The big thing is go to, there's 2 different websites. The show is NittanyGameWeek.com, and all the shows from this past year, interviews are on there. Scatter reports from teams and things like that. So that's all on there, and we're going to be adding that as we go. And then the book Hot Seat, which is a year in the life in college football pressure cooker, and Paterno Legacy, which is really a memoir about my life with my dad. Those are both at jvpaterno.com. That's Jay, the letter V, Paterno, Paterno, jvpaterno.com. So either one of those websites, go check it out, and hope you enjoy the book if you get it. I hope you enjoy the shows and all that kind of stuff. And I had a great time with you today.
Hey, thank you again for coming on. I learned a lot. The fans, thank you to all my fans who tuned in, man, and who asked the question. This wraps up episode 965 with the great Jay Paterno, former Penn State quarterback / coach. Now he's doing big things off the field with his show. Obviously, his 2 books that he has out there. Go check it out. Go follow Jay on all social media formats. Man, this guy's the best. I really learned a lot today from this interview, and thank you again for sharing your story on our platform. We would love to have you back on the show down the line at some point so you can meet the full team. But keep up the great work, man. Go Penn State. I hope you guys have a great year next year. And like you said, back to back. So it's a step-by-step process, but thank you again, man. This is awesome.
Great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.